Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is Christy, and I'm the marketing manager for our Master of Science in Humanitarian Action online degree program. You'll hear us refer to this degree with our acronym of MSHA throughout the presentation. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's program info session. First, we'll go ahead. A couple of housekeeping notes. First, before we get started, we are recording today's session, and you can expect an email to be sent your way with that recording later today. You'll also find a chat feature here in the webinar, so please jump in and say hello. We'd love to have this be an interactive session, so please comment with any questions you may have about the program. To get us started, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our MSHA team members who are with us today that you see on the screen, and then we'll move into the program info session portion of the presentation. We will end with a Q&A. So again, please don't be shy. Utilize that Q&A box and ask any questions throughout the presentation. Okay, so first up here, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Topher McDougal. He is the academic director here, as well as an associate professor of economic development in the Joan B. Kroc School of Peace Studies. His research focuses on the microeconomic causes and consequences of armed violence and disasters, illicit trade, especially in small arms, in environmental peace building. Here at the University of San Diego, he teaches courses on economic development, environmental peace and justice, humanitarianism, black markets, research methodology, and evaluation. In addition to consulting for various organizations, Dr. McDougal has been a research affiliate, principal of the Small Arms Data Observatory, and an invited scholar in residence. He was also the recipient of MIT's prestigious Presidential Doctoral Fellowship. Hi, Topher. Thanks for joining us. Next up, we have Nicole Sampson. Nicole is one of the enrollment counselors on our team. She has more than 13 years of experience in higher education. She has specialized experience in advising prospective students to pursue and advance their careers through the power of education. She's passionate about helping others accomplish their educational, professional, and career goals. So consider her a big partner in your success. So hi, Nicole. Thank you both for joining us today. Okay, great. We'll go ahead and move into the program info session portion. As a reminder, feel free to hop into that chat feature. Say hello, let us know where you're coming from, maybe what kind of work you're doing now, where you're looking to take your career. And as a reminder, we are recording this session today. So overview of where we're going to go today, we're going to have Topher here talk about the field of humanitarianism. Then we'll go into a program overview, talking about the details of the MSHA program and next steps. So in our first section, we'll talk about kind of who you are, who you might be, what you may be looking for, some key forces that are shaping the landscape, and how you intersect with today's urgent challenges. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Topher here.
Thank you so much, Christy. Welcome, everybody. It's really exciting to get a chance to address you all. And as Christy said, please do engage with the chat. We'd love to hear who you are, where you're coming from, what your interests are in this program, and any questions should you have them. I should mention that for whatever reason, a construction crew outside has decided to use today's opportunity to start using nail hammers and framing hammers. So you might hear that a little bit in the background. So I want to start with just an acknowledgement of where you might be coming from as you consider this program. We've got a wide range here of where our students are coming from and maybe coming from and maybe moving forward. If you're able to, we would love to have you jump into the chat, as I said, and let us know whether you see yourself identified in any of these fields. I think it's important to sort of acknowledge right off the bat that the humanitarian field in recent decades and prior to that has really been characterized by a huge patchwork quilt of experts from various technical domains trying to kind of harmonize and prioritize and sequence their initiatives. So we might have civil engineers working on water and sanitation interventions or shelter provision. We might have camp planners, physicians, family reunification experts, or social workers. There's also a whole segment of this field coming out of the medical side, medical professionals, from doctors to nurses to dentists, epidemiologists, community health workers, psychologists working on post-traumatic stress disorder and related issues. We have economists such as myself, monitoring and evaluation experts, etc. And only, over the past, I would say 2 decades, really, has there been a real push to professionalize the field in a more holistic way, starting with the creation of the SPHERE standards for humanitarian interventions and the establishment of PHAP, which is the professionals in humanitarian assistance and protection. But whether you're an experienced professional who's looking to take your career to the next level, or maybe transition from one career into the humanitarian field, or if you're a recent graduate, equally we would invite you to apply to this program. We're seeking applicants who may or may not have a background or experience in any of these areas, but are action-minded individuals with volunteer experience, interested in pursuing a career in the humanitarianism or disaster relief sector. So I will advance the slide here. The humanitarian field. I guess I should step back and to sort of ask, what is humanitarianism rhetorically ask, what is humanitarianism? In general, historically, the field really grew out of a desire to help ease the suffering of civilians and combatants in war, specifically, and to restore human dignity. So this grew out, starting with the Crimean War of 1853 to 1859, which has new resonances today, of course, starting in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea by Russia, and then but it was during the Crimean War when the English statistician and nurse Florence Nightingale worked to reduce death rates of soldiers. A little bit later, there was the Battle of Solferino in 1859. This is the last battle, sort of basically between monarchs in the world. And that inspired this Frenchman, Henri Dunant, to begin the process of humanizing war, of sort of setting limits on what types of actions can be taken in war, put guardrails on war. And those efforts would eventually result in the Geneva Conventions and the formation of the International Committee for the Red Cross and Red Crescent. Since then, humanitarianism has grown into an international effort to curb suffering from war and natural disasters, or what we call CHEs, complex humanitarian emergencies, which are combinations, right? Complex combinations of both of those. And in fact, oftentimes we'll call anything that involves a violent conflict a CHE. So now humanitarianism in general, it implicates, yes, the ICRC, the International Committee for the Red Cross and Red Crescent. It implicates UN-OCHA, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the UN Population Fund, the FPA, the World Food Program, the United Nations peacekeeping missions, various missions around the world, many bilateral agencies. For instance, in this country, in the United States, it's USAID. They have a Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, but these exist all around the world as well. And then also many many other types of, like, hundreds of international and domestic organizations, including secular organizations and religious organizations, nonprofit organizations, and increasingly, there's a whole sort of sphere of for-profit organizations as well. So where are we now? A few key facts and figures. global humanitarian spending is around $30 billion annually, but that figure really doesn't include domestic government disaster spending. So, for instance, in the United States, we spend around $15 billion just through the United States' Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, alone. And that figure also doesn't include private spending. It does not include remittances, which are actually probably the majority of disaster-related spending in many developing countries. So it's really a huge global sector. It's a huge global industry, as well as being and really spills over many different sectors. In fact, what else? We've just surpassed 100 million displaced people in the world for the first time in history. This number has been rising quickly in recent years due to a whole bunch of factors. And humanitarian spending will likely continue to rise into the future for a number of reasons. Right? We have obviously the elephant in the room is climate change. Climate change threatens to increase the incidence and intensity of natural disasters, both fast-moving, like hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons, and slow-moving, such as droughts, famine, the submersion of habitable land due to rising sea levels. Let's see. Climate change also has been linked to migration via desertification, salinization, extreme weather events, sea level rise. Though the extent to which that climate change has or will produce mass exoduses of so-called climate refugees continues to be hotly debated. But that debate is I think slowly being resolved, unfortunately, by events. Right, it's being overtaken by events. What's not debated so much is that there's a growing political backlash against all forms of migration in developed countries, where we've experienced heightened forms of nationalism, borders between North Africa and Europe, or North Africa and the Middle East, Europe and the Middle East, Latin America and the US, Oceania and Australia and New Zealand. These have all become extremely contested, militarized increasingly, places where we are seeing violations of human rights and a growing incidence of illicit trades. The experience of climate change may itself erode the economic and political functioning of governments, right? So this hampers their coping capacity to deal with its impacts and begs questions about international capacity to make up the difference. A co-author of mine and actually a MSHA faculty member, John Patterson, and we recently estimated that a 1 degree Celsius rise in global temperatures would require a $2.8 trillion increase in total global humanitarian expenditures if we were to want to maintain current levels of humanitarian coverage. So this is a huge issue for humanitarianism and all related sectors. I think that there's also another thing a phenomenon to keep your eye on moving forward is that there's this growing acknowledgement of the need for integrated thinking in humanitarianism. I mean, I talked previously about this patchwork quilt of technical expertise, and there's this desire to want to integrate them better. And in particular, we think about humanitarianism, development, and peace building as being increasingly intertwined in this so-called triple nexus. So the Global Humanitarian Assistance Report from 2019 noted that percentage-wise change in official development assistance, what we call ODA, had soared at that point by 400% in countries that were affected by protracted crises. And it was flatlining in stable ones. So, and also ODA was increasingly focused on disaster risk reduction, and that accounted for about over 40% of total disaster risk reduction funding. So of the over 1 billion people living in extreme poverty, it's over 1.1 actually, who are living in extreme poverty globally, about 450 million at that point lived in fragile states, and who are therefore at elevated risk of violent conflict and reduced coping capacities for disaster. So we're seeing essentially the portfolios for institutions like the World Food Program or the Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs overlap with the country-wise portfolio for institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. And this is why the Kroc School's focuses on peace building and conflict resolution and transformation mark this program out really as fundamentally different to most most other humanitarian programs out there. The third trend that I'd like to point out is this increasing need to design, monitor, and evaluate programs in really rigorous ways. Funders are increasingly requiring that our approaches to program design and M&E be really quite robust. The World Bank's Independent Evaluation Group had once estimated that the vast majority, I think 80% of World Bank projects that failed did so really not due to poor implementation at all, but really due to faulty logic and poor design. And the Kroc School's strengths in design, monitoring, and evaluation are really on display in this program, which has two courses, both the Program DME course and the Data Visualization and Analysis course that are dedicated to really bringing your skills up in these areas. Let's see. So where do you and the humanitarian field intersect? I think that we're oftentimes motivated in this field by crises that we have either experienced personally or those that we experience secondhand, those that we see in the media, and of course we can look around today and see no lack, unfortunately, for need in this area. So whether it's Ukraine or it's Syria, which has been ongoing, obviously, for a decade or more at this point. Ethiopian Tigray, which is probably one of the more underreported disasters of today. Yemen, we can talk about Mali, Burkina Faso, the U.S.-Mexico border, and then also, California wildfires. I think that it's important for us in this program increasingly to try to break down these artificial distinctions between humanitarian interventions abroad, humanitarian interventions at home from the point of view of the developed world, and breaking down those distinctions is a way, in a sense, of decolonizing the field and of thinking more globally and holistically about it, because these are certainly problems without passports, and the solutions need to be without passports as well. What else? I might mention, where do we want to go? The primary criterion for entering this field is that you are driven to change the world for the better, right? As I mentioned, humanitarianism is all about reducing suffering and restoring human dignity. Humanitarians often work across really vast disparities of power and funding, across vast differences of culture, of values. But the ability to seek out an underlying human connection with humility and kindness and humor and empathy will get you a long way in this field. Traits of successful humanitarians. If you see yourself in any of these descriptions, great. I normally think of humanitarians as being tolerant of personal discomfort, right? Whether that's physical or emotional. They're flexible. They're tolerant of empirical messiness, right? You may have learned something quite neatly in in school, in university, and empirically, it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot more complicated, a lot messier, and things rarely go as planned or as they should. Humanitarians need to be patient, but also persistent, right? So show a bit of determination to get through these patches of messiness. They need to be almost quietly aggressive, really tenacious in the field, while at the same time sort of maintaining their composure. They need to be collaborative. Everything in humanitarianism is based on teamwork. Usually, the whole humanitarian enterprise increasingly is based on what we call the cluster system, where you have different specializations that are organized as clusters and which operate as many teams, and then those teams have to coordinate amongst each other, right? So the ability to collaborate becomes very important. The ability to take time and do the work, as they say, that's needed for self-care. That's another trait of a successful humanitarian over the long run, right? You need to be able to address secondary, or in some cases even primary, trauma that you experience or may experience in the field. You're probably you need to be risk tolerant to some degree, right? You can't need to avoid have a psychological need to avoid all risk, but also not to be reckless, right? And hopefully you will be cool-headed in a crisis. A note on education versus experience, and headquarter versus field-related jobs. I think that if I were to make a really broad generalization, education in humanitarianism specifically used not to be quite so important, right? Education in program design, monitoring, and evaluation, or education in humanitarian logistics, that sort of thing, didn't used to be as important. You could come to this field from without, and whether, especially if you were a doctor, a nurse, whatever, that would be great. And if you had just been in the field for a long time and kind of had proven your ability to tough it out, that was also seen as a huge attribute. So experience was really valued more than education in some ways. We're seeing now a shift whereby part and parcel of the professionalization of the field is to, in some ways, bring everyone up to a certain standard of field performance and background knowledge, and so education is becoming increasingly important. A note about headquarters jobs versus the field. If you are thinking about going into this field, oftentimes, this is a huge distinction. You're obviously doing very different work usually at a headquarters position versus in the field, though headquarters positions may require travel to the field and probably do on sporadic bases. But field work really, it requires you to obviously live somewhere for anywhere between months and sometimes years long deployments. It's very important, I think, for the advancement of a career in humanitarianism to be able to make the transition back and forth, right? In my experience, those who stay at headquarters forever don't advance very quickly, and those who stay in the field forever don't advance very quickly. The people who stay at headquarters forever are considered maybe a little bit out of touch with what's going on in the field, the needs of the field. Those who stay in the field forever just get completely forgotten about, right? Like maybe there are all sorts of cultural tropes around going native or going off the rails or whatever it might be. And many of these are obviously very neo-colonial. But those people who are able to affect a periodic transition back and forth between one and the other and keep those two connected, keep the theory connected to the praxis or the policy connected to the praxis, are in my experience usually the most successful overall. Let's advance here. Job outlooks. So there's a huge panoply of jobs out there. Many of them associated, as I said, with headquarters postings, many of them with field postings. I think that overall, job prospects in this field are growing for many of the reasons that I've already outlined, right? Among professionals working on issues related to humanitarian crises, spanning large natural disasters and man-made situations, right? This need to understand and manage complex situations is large, and it's growing. In terms of natural disasters and violent conflict, right, there's a growing incidence of crisis, and this has swollen the importance of humanitarian assistance as a portion of total overseas development assistance, right, from about 15% of ODA to 29% just in the last decade alone. So as I said, roughly it was roughly a $30 billion humanitarian assistance was roughly a $30 billion sector officially as of 2018, 2019. It's grown a little bit since then. There are currently around 375,000 humanitarian aid workers around the world. It's growing at an annual rate of about 6%, which is about twice, maybe even 3 times the rate of global GDP growth, maybe twice. And about maybe 3 times the rate of growth of the rich world. Those numbers don't really include donor government employees or military personnel. So it's probably more than much more than that. The military plays increasingly important roles in humanitarian interventions, logistically and otherwise. Moreover, those numbers don't really include domestic spending on disaster risk reduction and response, which globally may be around 20 times that of official international humanitarian aid flows. In the United States, recent domestic disasters, including raging wildfires and intensifying hurricanes and COVID-19, all of that have intersected with
I think we lost him for just a second as he's coming back on.
Racial disparity.
Sorry, Topher, I
was I lost?
It froze for just a moment, but you're back now. Unless it was just on my end. I'll let you go ahead and continue.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know where I was, so yeah, anyway. So anyway, all signs indicate that the growth of the humanitarian sector is going to continue. So for instance, in the global arena, this distinction, as I said, between development aid, which is about 38% of US foreign aid, and humanitarian aid, on the other hand, it's only about 16% of US foreign aid, that distinction is fast dissolving, and it has the potential to bring humanitarians into a much larger area of practice. As humanitarian crises really become protracted, and poverty is increasingly concentrating in fragile and conflict-affected states. The incidence of violent conflict has risen sharply since its historical nadir, right around 2006. And as I mentioned, global warming is really forecast to further exacerbate that trend, and to increase the incidence and severity of droughts and all of the rest of it. And then finally, there's this really growing recognition in the humanitarian field that the traditional focus is on disaster response and risk reduction, whether they take the form of displacement camp planning or emergency public health interventions or food aid or others, are really less holistic than they need to be. And so, as I said, this embrace of the triple nexus all means that the humanitarian that's able to enter the field with this more holistic lens, forward-looking lens, is going to be well positioned. So with that, I think I'll say just a very, I think I've been over long here, so I'll be very quick about organizations hiring. As I said before, the organizations that hire in this area really span a huge range. So from international governments, so UN agencies like UNICEF, UNFPA, UNOCHA, to bilateral organizations, whether it's Japan's JICA or the German JZ or USAID. These are all bilateral institutions, to international NGOs. So many of those are listed here. Mercy Corps, which is a secular one, Save the Children, World Jewish Relief, right? Anyway, so there are literally hundreds of these out there working. Doctors Without Borders is obviously a large one that spun off actually historically from the ICRC. And then finally there are what we'd like to be able to acknowledge as well is that it's not just international NGOs. It's also domestic NGOs working on domestic responses to humanitarian crises and disasters domestically. I guess I will finish end these comments just with also an acknowledgement that the private sector is playing an increasingly important role in this area. Increasingly, NGOs are realizing that they perhaps shouldn't be relying entirely on government aid, whether that's bilateral or multilateral aid, to deliver on their promises. And really interesting public-private partnerships are working their way through. I won't spend any additional time sort of giving you examples, but the idea of incorporating social innovation and social entrepreneurship into this field is one that is on the rise. So I think with that, I will hand it back over to Christy.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Topher. I appreciate it. We're going to move into the next portion of today's session and bring on Nicole here. Again, Nicole is one of the enrollment advisors on our team, so she's going to give you another look at the program overview, our leadership, the support we provide, the program structure, and then we'll bring Topher back on when we touch on the courses and the curriculum that you can expect in the MSHA program. So with that, Nicole, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Christy. Welcome, future Toreros. My name's Nicole. I'm an admissions advisor. I've been with USD for the last almost 8 years. I'll go ahead and start off by giving you an overview of the University of San Diego as a whole. So we were founded in 1949. We're a private nonprofit university with a long-standing tradition of educating leaders. We are recognized by the Carnegie Foundation as a community engagement institution. And we're also an Ashoka Changemaker campus, which essentially means that we have been designated because of our proven track record that we're dedicated to innovation and change. And of course, we are a top-ranked university academically. And to some people, even more importantly, we have been ranked the most beautiful campus in the nation. I know we're all here to look at an online master's program, but you will all get student ID cards. So you will have access to the campus just like anybody else. So you'll have access to the campus and the resources. And if you're looking for an excuse to come out to San Diego, just do well in your program and you can come out here and walk for graduation as well. So, all right, so that was the University of San Diego as a whole. Within the university, there are multiple different schools. So we have the School of Professional and Continuing Education, Hahn School of Nursing. For this program, you will be in the Kroc School of Peace Studies. It has a strong reputation for innovation and developing the next generation of change makers. So within the school, there are multiple different programs. Your program is the online Masters in Humanitarian Action, which is a very mission-driven program with an innovative core. So you will have multiple levels of support. Obviously, you have your academic director, Dr. McDougal, who you just heard from. You'll have your student success team, which, if I do say so myself, is pretty amazing. Your team consists of your admissions advisors, myself, and there's a whole other team of admissions advisors as well. What we do is we take you from literally this webinar, this initial conversation, all the way through registering to, for your first class. Once that happens, you'll be handed off to your program coordinator, and your program coordinators essentially act as a student advocate. So whether you're in San Diego, a different state, or in a different country entirely, they are there to make sure that all of your questions are being answered and you're getting all the help that you need. Of course, you'll have the whole USD community, so you'll have your fellow classmates and alumni as well to lean on and network with as you're going through the program. And even more importantly than all of us, you'll have your faculty. So everyone they're all scholarly practitioners. They work in their field of study. So they're great people to bounce ideas back and forth off of as you're going through the program. And they very much want you to be just as successful as you want you to be. So definitely utilize them during your time with USD. So general course overview. Essentially, this program is 10 classes. Each class is 3 units, so you'll have 30 units in total. From the big perspective to the smaller perspective, it's a 20-month program in total. You are taking one class at a time. Each class is 7 weeks long, and you'll have 2 classes per semester. So how this breaks down is if you're starting classes in the fall, your first class will start on September 6th. You're only taking one class at a time. This way you don't have to juggle multiple classes, multiple assignments, multiple professors. It gives you the chance to just focus on that one class and be successful. So your first class will start on September 6th. That class will last for 7 weeks. The day after that class ends, you'll start your second class, which will also go for 7 weeks, and that will conclude your first semester. You'll get a bit of a break in between semesters, and essentially you'll repeat that cycle for 5 semesters total, again, which is 20 months overall. And of course, this program was designed for working professionals, so it is asynchronous and incredibly flexible. I'm going to go ahead and hand this next slide off to Dr. McDougal to talk about what you'll learn, and then I'll see you in a second.
All right, so we have what you're seeing right here is the curriculum, the course list. I want to just briefly to run through our learning objectives. We have 6 of them. They're knowledge. Students will be able to integrate and apply complex skills and thematic knowledge required to navigate and address complex humanitarian crises. Diverse perspectives. We want to increase the diversity of the perspectives we include here. Critical inquiry, applied learning, communication, ethical reasoning. I think that's 6. Yeah. So the applied learning is really a piece that it's a signature piece of the pedagogical approach that the Kroc School has embraced over its history, and that's a particular challenge to an online to introduce that to an online curriculum. But I think that it's one that we have we've stepped up to and have met. But the curriculum starts out with 2 foundations courses because we wanted to introduce the field of humanitarianism. We want to approach the whole sector of humanitarianism through this triple nexus, right, that I talked about previously: humanitarianism, peace building, and development. And because we are a school of peace building and have this strong tradition of expertise in conflict analysis and resolution, negotiations, mediation, facilitation, we sort of anchor your foundational experience not with a class on humanitarian action per se, but with a class on the foundations of peace, justice, and social change. This is a course that all Kroc students take. So it's a course that is the first thing that any student, any master's student coming into a Kroc program, be it in person or online, takes. So our Master of Arts in Peace and Justice students, our Master of Science in Conflict Resolution students, our Master of Arts in Social Innovation students, and this program as well. Secondly, there will be a class on the foundations of humanitarian action, and this is where you really get many of the normative commitments of humanitarianism, the history of humanitarianism, a map of the sort of structural layout of humanitarianism, and maybe what's coming down the line in a kind of future-oriented way. Moving into the second semester, we have disaster management and prevention. This course will be focused on issues like community resilience to disasters. We know that from studies that oftentimes the old axiom that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure is maybe not quite right, but it's maybe like a 2-to-1 ratio. That a dollar spent on prevention is worth $2 spent on disaster recovery, or can avert $2 spent on disaster recovery. Then you move into humanitarian diplomacy. When you think about things like, how do you negotiate access as a humanitarian to these situations, right? This is a situation that has been sadly on display in the Ukraine, where the negotiation of humanitarian corridors for civilians out of cities like Mariupol was really quite difficult, right? We move into then a course on displacement, climate, and humanitarian action, because this is a huge and growing area. And I won't dwell on this because I already dwelled on it. But this is one of the primary movers of humanitarianism, and will continue to be so over the course of the next a half century or more. Humanitarian safety and security. This is how one can conduct oneself and design one's programs in order to maximize the safety to your own team members and to those that you purport to be beneficiaries of your programs. Program design, monitoring, and evaluation. This is a course that I teach to the Master of Arts in Peace and Justice program, and this is more geared towards humanitarian programs, but nevertheless has many of the same elements sort of structuring it. And this is really a class that asks you to be able to put together what we call program research designs to make sure that you are having the sorts of effects that you purport to have when you set out to carry out an intervention. Data visualization and analytics. This is an increasingly important skill in this field, to be able to identify the data you need, to structure it, to analyze it, and to then convey those findings to your stakeholders, whether they be beneficiaries or funders or your team members, in order to sequence and prioritize your intervention. So this is oftentimes used not only in monitoring and evaluation, but also in baseline assessments and needs assessments, things like that. Lastly, everyone will finish up with the last two courses on logistics for humanitarian relief. That is, how do all of these pieces that we've been juggling actually get put in place in a real live situation? And then finally, a humanitarian crisis situation. And this, while it is an asynchronous situation, it will be one where you do have to work in teams, and it will be a teaching case based, right? So we'll have a teaching case that takes you through a hypothetical crisis in all of its messiness, where you will have to role play and begin to develop some of these collaborative skills that I had alluded to earlier. So that is the curriculum, and I think I'm going to be passing this back to Nicole.
Yes. Okay, so you just received a brief course description of each class, but here is a visual for you so you can see how it's laid out. So if you look under the section that says foundational courses, the course in parentheses is actually your orientation class. So orientation is mandatory. It's also free, just in case anybody had any questions about that. But you do need to complete that before classes start. You can log on log on and off as much as you want until you can complete your orientation course. But essentially, it's there to help you feel comfortable and confident before actually jumping in and starting classes, feeling confident with the online platform, that is. And then if you were to start in the fall, you can see that your first class, the MSHA 500, that class will start on September 6th. And again, that'll go for 7 weeks. The day after that class ends, MSHA 501 will begin, and that'll conclude your first semester. Then you'll jump into your 3 semesters of your core courses. So your foundational course, your first 2 foundational courses will be in the fall. Then you can look at the box that has MSHA 540 and 550. That will begin in the spring, which is in January. The class at the bottom of the circle, that's your summer semester, which will begin roughly in May. Your next fall semester, which will be 520 and 530. And then you'll move on to your final core course, which is MSHA 595. And then your capstone course 599, which you will complete in the spring. So let's go over your course schedule. I generally tell my students to dedicate about 15 hours a week towards their program. Now, with that being said, it could fluctuate from week to week, and it really does depend on your own personal study habits. But to give you an idea, if you look at day 1, your course will start on a Tuesday. Your modules will launch. Day 4, your discussion board posts are due. And then day 7, your assignment is due and the replies to your fellow classmates' discussion board posts that they made on that previous Friday. So those are when your assignments are due, but during the week, you have the flexibility to dictate your own study schedule. So for example, if you know you're gonna have a late night at work or an exhaustive soccer game at night with the kids and you just know that you're not gonna be able to log on Wednesday night, you don't have to log on Wednesday night. As long as you turn your assignments in by the deadline, then you're good to go. So really, just to emphasize, make sure you're adhering to the assignment deadlines. All right, moving on to tuition and financial aid. So we do have a few different funding options. We do accept federal financial aid, and if you have any questions on that, let me know. I'm happy to send you the instructions on how to complete that, along with our school code as well. We do have interest-free payment plan options available. So you'll be connected with the student accounts department, and essentially you'll pick the plan that best fits your situation. We do accept employer tuition assistance and tuition reimbursement, and we are a yellow ribbon school as well. So we accept military benefits, and we do have a military and veterans department. So I can get you connected with them if you're looking to utilize any of that. To make sure all of your documents are done correctly and are turned in on time. Overall, the total cost of the program is $21,300. So if you look at the cost per unit, it's $710 multiplied by the 30 units in the program. That's how you get the total cost of the $21,300. Now that's for the entire program, and that's for tuition. There's 2 other fees associated with the program. So you'll want to set aside some additional funding for books. And there is an application fee, but if you're looking to apply for the fall, I can give you a waiver code so you don't have to pay the application fee. So really it just comes down to tuition and books. And then next steps from here is basically have a conversation with me. We will go over your background and the admissions requirements, and I'll answer any additional questions you might have about the program or the application process. Let's get to the meat of the admissions process here. So requirements. It is required that you have a bachelor's degree from a regionally accredited school. We do have to have those official transcripts on file. Now, for international students, we will have to have an official transcript evaluation completed through one of our 6 approved agencies through USD. We recommend generally World Education Services, but there's 5 other agencies that you can go through as well, and I can walk you through all that when the time comes. But we are looking for a minimum bachelor's grade point average of a 3.0 or higher. Now, with that being said, if your bachelor's degree is a little bit low, that doesn't mean you are completely discounted from the application process. What we would do is we would go through what's called a gray area review. So we would just submit a couple initial documents, including your resume, a copy of your transcripts at that point, and then a short statement from you as to why you had a low GPA in your undergrad degree and how you're in a position to be more successful academically now. So if you have a low GPA, don't count yourself out. I will walk you through that process, and we will do everything we can to make your application look good for the admissions committee. We're also looking for a minimum of 2 years of professional experience. In the application itself, you all have a personal statement that you need to write, which consists of 4 short essays. Don't be overwhelmed by the essays. It sounds like a lot. It's not going to be a novel. The 4 essays in total are going to be less than 700 words. So your academic director, Dr. McDougal, he's looking for a personal statement answering those 4 essay questions in the length of somewhere between 500 and 700 words, which is about a page and a half. You'll also upload your resume, and we need 1 letter of recommendation from a current supervisor. Now, if you don't want to use your current supervisor, or if you don't have one, that's totally fine. The only difference is we'll have to have 2 recommendations on file, and they can come from essentially anybody that can attest to your work ethic. So previous coworkers, previous employers, professors. We just want to have those 2 recommendations on file if you're not using a current supervisor. And then an additional side note for international students, we do require an English proficiency exam. So either a TOEFL exam with a minimum score of 83, or an IELTS exam with a minimum score of 7. There are some potential exceptions for students who've completed their bachelor's degree outside of the United States from a school that is completely English speaking. So when and if it gets to that point, there's a potential for a waiver of that exam, but it's all on a case-by-case basis. And again, I can walk you through that when the time comes then. So to kind of wrap this up, the application process, initially it's personal review. So going through this webinar, looking at the information that I'll send you, and then having a conversation with myself or another admissions advisor to go over your background to make sure that it meets the admissions requirements. If everything looks good and you're excited and you feel comfortable with everything, then we'll move forward with your admissions application. We'll help you get all of your documents submitted. If you're accepted into the program, the next step is orientation and then starting classes. As a reminder, the fall term will start on September 6th, but the application deadline is coming up pretty quickly here on August 1st. Again, I can give you a waiver code so you don't have to pay that application fee. But if fall classes is something that you're excited about, then we need to get moving with the process so we can make sure to get your recommendations and all official transcripts on file as soon as possible. So with that, I hope to soon be welcoming each and every one of you to the USD family. And if you have any questions moving forward, I am happy to help. Again, my name is Nicole, and thank you for logging on to this webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. We do have a couple minutes for questions, and we will go ahead and go through some of those. This one, Topher, you might be able to answer, or Nicole. One of the questions here is about the 4 essays versus a personal statement. Is the 4 essays the personal statement, or is there something separate?
Yes, so I'll take that. So the 4 essays are the personal statement.
Great. Easy peasy. Thank you. Okay, a couple other questions. One thing that I wanted to ask you, Topher, and have you speak to a little bit is, what if you don't have those 2 years of professional experience? Let's say you're coming out of your undergrad, you have a different kind of volunteer experience. Can you speak to those applicants a little bit and what you might say to them?
Yeah, of course. So ideally, we are looking for people who have some professional experience, and most ideally in some sort of related tangential field. However, we're also really interested in people who will be growing up endogenously in humanitarianism. And so that might look really different. It's oftentimes, you oftentimes find yourself in the humanitarian field in particular in this sort of catch-22 around, nobody wants to hire you unless you have experience, and you can't get experience unless you're hired, right? So oftentimes people sort of bootstrap that by getting volunteer experience on the side. So if you have been volunteering during your undergraduate or afterwards, I think that's terrific and fantastic, and you should very much highlight that in your application.
Great, thank you so much. We have time for a couple other questions. One, and this one I'll have you field, Nicole. What do you say for people who are just getting back into online learning? They're a little bit concerned about what that looks like. They've not been to school in quite some time. What kind of advice would you have to share with those folks?
Well, first of all, it's completely normal. I did my master's online as well after a period of, taking time off in between your bachelor's degree. But I talk to students every single day that are nervous about writing and getting back into APA format. We do have a career services department, so we have people here, again, that want you to be successful. So essentially, if you're worried about any of that, we have a ton of resources. You'll speak to your program coordinator, and we can point you in the right direction to different links on, how to properly format an APA paper, or we can hook you up with somebody in the career services department to, if you need tutoring or help, like reviewing one of your papers or anything like that. And obviously, a big portion, I think, of your stress will be eliminated after you go through orientation. You'll realize that the online platform is pretty intuitive, and there's a lot of resources on there, and how easy it is to communicate with your professors and everybody else. So take a deep breath. It is totally normal to feel like that, but don't let that get in the way of progress and achieving your goals. And I'm here to help you. I might not have all the answers right off the bat, but I can definitely make sure you're connected with all the right people to make you feel comfortable.
I would also just add, that's a terrific and very comprehensive answer. And also, once people are admitted into the program, the Kroc School has our own librarian at the USD Copley Library, who is dedicated to assisting Kroc students to navigate the online library resources, to help you figure out, say, EndNote, and if you wanted to use that as your citation software. We also have, through the School of Leadership and Education Sciences, some resources for students who are looking to get help with their academic writing. So you're able to submit your papers through this resource and get some feedback. So there's many resources out there.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you both so much for joining us for this presentation. For all of you who attended, thank you so much. It's great to see your comments and your different areas of interest here in the chat. So thank you for taking part and engaging with us. We will go ahead and close out, but I want to make sure everyone knows how to get in touch with us. Our website is here on the screen, humanitarianaction.sandiego.edu. Our email, the main program email, is humanitarianaction@sandiego.edu. You have more than likely been in contact or contacted by one of our enrollment advisors, likely Robinelle, or Jake or Nicole here, and there's a couple other team members helping as well, so you can reach out to one of them. If you're not sure who to get in touch with, that Humanitarian Action email, we will get you connected. The application deadline is coming up on August 1st, as Nicole mentioned, so we've got about 3 weeks, more than enough time to get the application in, but it is coming up, and sometimes those letters of recommendation and things like that can take some time. So we do encourage you to go ahead and get started as soon as you can. But thank you all so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Take care.